manufacturing activity in 4 years here at home, we're definitely out of sync, especially with Europe, where factories are still growing. Let's stay with this crucial sector for our economy to discuss. We're joined by Coenraad Bezuidenhout from the Manufacturing Circle that represents many of the country's top manufacturers. Thank you for joining us.
It's
Coenraad.
a pleasure to be here.
So purchasing managers who are surveyed, they're pretty pessimistic, not only about now, but the future. Are you as well?
Well,
we don't often have good news on manufacturing.
I'm an eternal optimist, so you know, I just chug along. But clearly, I mean, conditions in April weren't good. I must say that the public holidays do play in on the picture.
Yeah.
We had numerous instances of stage 3 load shedding, which means that heavy furnaces get switched off. Those things take a day or more to reach optimal operating temperature. So it really exacts a lot from manufacturing when you reach that stage of load shedding. We shouldn't underestimate the impact of the xenophobic attacks. It's a serious situation. Our major export market is Africa at the moment, and our African counterparts are angry at us, and rightfully so.
Is that showing in the figures yet, or is that something you expect?
It may not have been showing in the analysis that was put forward on the PMI today, but we are currently undertaking the Manufacturing Circle's quarterly business condition survey, and the responses are currently being analysed. But the individual responses that I saw, there were a number of them that mentioned xenophobic attacks. It's not only the fact that these African markets, our perception has weakened there, it's also the impact that it's having on investors overseas that are considering South Africa as a base for their manufacturing investments going into Africa, which is under threat now. And then as well, we've got domestic traders and contractors that are owned and operated by Africans from the rest of the continent, which also provide offtake for domestic manufacturing.
This is such a pity when we want to position ourselves as the gateway to Africa. So a huge blow to that aim, I suppose.
No, of course. I mean, we can't trade on being a gateway to Africa anymore. The only reason why we can is perhaps the fact that we've got some infrastructure and that we've got a strong financial sector. The rest is blown out of the water, basically. Then finally, there's industrial action that is threatening in the gold mining sector and also in the public sector. Those have a huge impact as well, and it's stuff that we need to consider going forward. Clearly the manufacturers are anticipating bad days ahead.
Well, we have to now wait until next Monday to hear about their public sector strike. Let's bring up a graph of South African activity, because if you look at manufacturing, take a look there in January. Now considering that 50 is that fence mark between expansion and contraction. In January we were doing so well, manufacturing helping this economy. We've come down dismally. So is that all just load shedding, public holidays? What's going on here? Because didn't we have load shedding in January as well?
The uptick in January is traditionally there because it's basically activity resuming after the festive holidays. It's traditionally there every year. But what we are seeing in February, March and April is concerning, and that is largely ascribable to what we've been seeing with regards to energy supply. Remember, the energy situation is on top of other challenges that's being experienced in terms of municipal supply of energy, where it's wavy or infrastructure is not being maintained. There's also water supply issues that are perennial in a number of our leading manufacturing municipalities. Those things all add up. If you then on top of that have heavy load shedding happening, then it does not bode well for manufacturing.
Well, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but since Brian Molefe has moved in, the load shedding has eased off. And he said that they're focusing on maintenance and they're focusing on load shedding. Does the Manufacturing Circle welcome that? Well,
those of us who've dealt with Brian Molefe hold him in very high regard. I think certainly a lot of the confidence issues around manufacturing, around the energy supply situation is psychological. It helps that you have an experienced hand on the tiller that can actually communicate in a sensible way to the broader constituency. It gives at least a specter of trust that we're going to go in a particular direction. He's sending out the right kinds of messages. But it's not going to help us if we expect that to be the silver bullet. We need concerted action, sustained action.
Let's look at the Eurozone now, because I want to ask, if you look at our figures in a global context, are we out of sync? If you look how well European manufacturing is doing, especially German manufacturing, the sector there, does this show that we're scoring a whole lot of own goals, or how can we emulate their success?
Look, I think that something that we must acknowledge is that whereas the rest of the world, particularly the developed markets in the last couple of quarters, have done well in terms of improving their position, South Africa has gone the other way. And a lot of the reasons for that is domestic challenges and poor policy response to those domestic challenges. So that we have to acknowledge outright. I think that Germany's recovery, or the Eurozone's recovery, is particularly positive in the sense that there were many people that had a very gloomy picture to paint, because they expected that it was going to take a longer time for the Eurozone to arrive at a common view of how to move forward.
Yes.
So I think in that respect it's positive. It's also positive because the Eurozone is an important export market for South African manufacturers, one of our most important established export markets. And that means increase in demand for us going forward.
Okay, but the problem now is, if we move to China, can we blame China for some of our poor showing? I mean, look where they are at the moment, sort of on that level, that 50 mark, but there's so much concern about China. So which is more important? Because these are both strong markets for us as South Africa.
Look, both are important, but for different reasons. I think in terms of the Eurozone in America, improvements there are great, but it's on the back of a whole number of global dynamics that are happening, one of which is significant structural changes that are happening in the Chinese economy. Their wages are rising at a fair pace. Their currency has been appreciating. It's put them in a position where they are not any longer the cheap manufacturing destination that they used to be. Many manufacturers looking for cheap manufacturing destination are now considering countries like Vietnam and Malaysia, and perhaps even in the odd instance a low-cost African economy with some significant industrial incentives to a minor degree.
So we don't fit there as a low-cost centre at all.
Unfortunately, no longer.
We're not flying high in innovation on the other spectrum. How do you think we get manufacturing going locally? What you've looked at the policy responses, what do you still want government to do that's not being done? There's a lot of talk of black industrialists that aren't being supported. What interventions should be happening now?
Look, there are black industrialists today that are having difficulty achieving the type of success that they imagined would have been possible on the back of the same policy difficulties that established manufacturers are experiencing. The difficulty with implementing preferential procurement initiatives across government, for instance. Those are things that make it difficult for them as well. I think what we need to realize that there is no silver bullet. What you need to do is bring costs down and grow your market. We need to be efficiency driven and innovation led. That requires interventions on in a range of areas. But what you need is very strong leadership from government, and you need the ability for business and labor to, at a very low level and higher up, do pact building around issues such as productivity. What are we going to do with taking our company forward? What kind of goals in terms of productivity and profitability and growth and job creation do we want to see? And they then together need to go to government and put their expectations on the table.
All right, thank you so much for your analysis. That was Coenraad Bezuidenhout from the manufacturing